share the information with others, and we share this with the media and the community as well. So thank you guys so much. Glad to have you here, Alexandra.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to all of our council members, our guests, and our subcommittee members who have also joined us today as attendees. As always, thank you for your time and your commitment and your dedication and your presence here today. I'll start with a land acknowledgement by acknowledging the Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache peoples, the traditional custodians of our land since time immemorial. I acknowledge the deep connections to the land and the significant contributions that have been made and continue to be made to the broader community statewide. I honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations. I also acknowledge my ancestors, African peoples who were stolen and enslaved and brought to this country, and acknowledge that because of their resilience, I am here. I also want to acknowledge that this month, from September 15th through October 15th, is the celebration of the National Hispanic Heritage Month. As we arrive here, it is already October. I'm looking over at my calendar. We acknowledge that this is long-term, ongoing work of a council on racial justice, and the consideration for if and how we institute this work in our state is something that we will discuss today. As always, I want to acknowledge and thank Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, Amy, Shawnee, Tammy, Kaylee, Mary Lou, Carolyn, all for staffing this council, and for each of you for your continued service and contribution. Today we are going to start. We have guests to discuss several pieces of legislation that will be moving forward this legislative session that align with the priority area that we established at our last council meeting, focused on law enforcement and policing. And so we'll talk about this more as well, but we are looking to present suggestions to the governor for the legislative session at our council meeting on November 18th, which means including this meeting, we have 3 meetings of the council before that time. We will be trying to move some of these things forward. And so today, first we have Senator Antoinette Sedillo Lopez, Representative Gail Chasey, and Representative Patricia Roybal Cabellero here to present on a bill that was, I believe, Senate Bill 17 last session. And I'll hand the floor over to Senator Sedillo Lopez.
Thank you.
Before we begin, can we just get a few people in our room here who have come into the wrong space? So Mary Lou, can you please move David Cooper into the room, Fatima Van Hattem into the room, Jacqueline Rosol into the room, Kaylee Salazar into the room? Okay, apologies, Senator, please go ahead.
Thank you. It is quite an honor to be able to present before this very important commission. I'm so delighted that the governor appointed it because it's long overdue, and so much of the work should have been done decades ago. But it's very, very important that it's moving forward now. To tell you a little bit of the history behind this bill. This bill started with Vecinos Unidos, or Vecinos United, I believe is the correct name. When it actually started as SB 100, the session before the last session. They brought this bill forward because of their concern of what they saw happening in the community with regard to excessive use of force by police officers. For me, it also was spurred, and the reason I got very interested in this bill was because of the shooting, the sheriff's shooting of a young woman who received 21 bullets in her body with an unclear allegation of whether or not she had a knife. and there were no cameras. There were no lapel cameras. So Miss Lucero was killed. Her sister reached out to me, Elaine. And the other thing about this that's really, she's a tiny woman, and the call was a mental health call. So it was a very, very upsetting case. And I started digging deeper and deeper into what was happening in our community. As you know, a year or less than a year later, probably 6 months later, the BLM, Black Lives Matter movement just really highlighted what was going on. And so thank goodness for my co-sponsors. We started working on this bill, and what we saw was in the current practice was a problem with transparency, a problem with accountability, and a problem with timeliness with regard to these police excessive force cases. And so what this bill addresses is it addresses every use of excessive police force that resulting in great bodily harm in the community. And it requires that there be an immediate report to the governor's office, immediate report to the AG's office, and the AG's office would come in immediately. And so would the state police department to do an independent investigation, so that the police department that was involved in the shooting would not be investigating its own police officer. You would have the Attorney General's office either has partners with the local DA's office. I mean, well, okay, let me explain. The state police would be the lead on the investigation, and then you would have the Attorney General's office either partnering with the local DA's office or taking it over completely. And there would also be a requirement, so that would address the fear or the concern that there was bias in these investigations. It also requires a quarterly report by the DA's office that would explain the status of the case, and because this has now been over a year, almost a year and a half since the shooting, and there still has not been any resolution of Ms. Lucero's case, and her family's still looking for justice, and they don't know what's going on. So it would require a quarterly report that would detail what is the status of the investigation. And if there is a determination that they are not going to prosecute the police officer, the AG's office or the DA's office would have to give a public report on why the police action, this isn't limited to shootings, the police action was justified. And it would have to cite all relevant evidence. I should mention that the AG's office said that they felt that the requirement of citing all the relevant evidence was burdensome and maybe too much. And so I invited them and said, well, give me some language. It just so happened that Clara Moran, who I was negotiating with at the time, left the AG's office to become a district judge. So I never got any language. So we still have that language. I don't think it's too much to have them cite all of the relevant evidence. And so what this bill does is it tries to increase transparency, definitely increase accountability and timeliness of these investigations. I will be happy to answer. I believe you have a copy of the bill. Is that correct? Do you all have a copy of the bill? Yes. I'm happy to answer. Do you have a copy of the bill? I'm not sure.
So I'm sorry, I was trying to find my mute button. We do not have a copy of the bill. If you wanted to send that to us, I can forward that out to others. That would be great.
Okay, I right now, I can do that while my colleagues are speaking about the bill, but I will definitely, it's SB 17 and I'm going to send you the link to that. So I appreciate that. I apologize. I thought you had the copy of the bill. I'm happy to answer any questions about the specifics. The goal is very clear, and I think it would really provide, I also believe that having this accountability and knowing that all of the details of the police action are going to be made public will be a step in the direction of changing the culture of the police departments. I don't think that this bill is the end-all be-all. I think it is a small step, but I think it's an important step. And I will stand for questions, and I will now turn it over to my colleague, Representative Chasey.
Thank you so much, Senator. And I appreciated Senator Sedillo Lopez's work on this prior to the special session. We have actually had discussions around this issue for years. And in fact, one of the Albuquerque City councilors had, I think she may have even had the Albuquerque City Council weigh in on approval of such a concept. And I know Representative Patricia Roybal Cabellero has worked with some of the community organizers in the past on similar things. So I was happy to serve as a co-sponsor for the House of Representatives. And I think that what I'm going to do with the rest of my time real quickly is just talk about the memorial. And then Representative Roybal Cabellero go on to talk about Bill and her experience with working on it in the past. The memorial was House Memorial 3, and it was Senate Memorial something. I'm not sure what the number was over there, but I can send the link to whom should I send it? To you, Alexandria, or to
Amy, if you can.
Amy?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I probably need to get Amy's email address. So, what I wanted to say about that is the police chief in Farmington has spoken to our committee, the Criminal Justice Reform Subcommittee and the Courts, Corrections, and Justice Committee about it. He has been a chief of police in Alaska and then also in Farmington. He was talking about body cameras, but we were also talking very much about training of police. And I think he's a resource on this. We see him as an ally to, and in fact, we had the Law Enforcement Academy folks on our Criminal Justice Reform Subcommittee today. We have a new director, and I'm not sure where she came from, but she has been in several other states. And she was pointing out some of the structural problems that make it hard for some of the things we want to, some of the improvements we want to occur. So I think we're going to be looking at structural changes on the Law Enforcement Academy. And so that is one issue. But with regard to House Memorial 3, I did pull it up so I could look at it. And it does call for representation by, let me see, here we have a civil rights organization, an organization representing criminal defendants, prosecutors, African-American community, Native American community, Hispanic community, an organization with experience organizing political demonstrations, representing the immigrant community, the mentally ill, people with physical disabilities, victims of domestic violence, victims of violent crime, and an organization representing gay and transgendered individuals. Now, one of the issues was that the memorial was written so that it would happen at the School of Law, and the dean of the School of Law did tell Senator Sedillo Lopez they don't really have the resources that we contemplate in a final product. But Sheila Lewis, who's a former appellate public defender and attorney staffing House Judiciary, is doing some work for the Thornburg Foundation, and she believes that the foundation would be willing to fund the work of the task force. So that is very exciting, and I think that we can look at trying to look at the memorial and see how you think it needs to be expanded, improved, and so forth. I do want to tell you, you said your last meeting is November the 18th. On November the 16th, we are going to have a presentation at the the large criminal courts, corrections, and justice committee from the Legislative Finance Committee, because they are completing a study of police violence. So I think if you're not already aware of that, you're going to want to hear from the LFC on that topic. And this is just for to put into your, what do I call it, your mix of problems for solving. But one of the issues that Miss Lewis came across when she was working with in her work with Thornburg Foundation is, and I hadn't really thought about this before. Do you know the sheriffs in New Mexico really have, sorry, it's really dry here. They aren't accountable to any governing body. They're not, the county commission cannot tell the sheriff what to do. They don't hire the sheriff. The voters elect the sheriff. Whereas that's not the case with your police departments, because they are hired by the cities. So I think when we are looking at some kinds of reforms, we probably need to keep that structure in mind. And I think I'm off the topic of the bill, but I think the it's very important to remove the uncertainty of the current situation and to begin to deliver justice in a timely fashion, because when it is not, it's not justice. So thank you so much. And we got through it without CenturyLink. So
thank you, Representative. Thank you, Senator. Is it okay for me to go ahead on now, Amy? Thank you. And I first want to start by saying thank you to all of the commission for your service and for stepping up and agreeing to this very significant work. I want to start by saying I am Piro Manso Tiwa Pueblo from southern New Mexico. I am Chicana. My children, grandchildren are African American and Latino, biracial. And I personally have been the target and subject of physical harm due to the color of my skin by law enforcement as a young activist in the 60s and 70s. So this is, as I said earlier, has embodied my whole being in terms of how I've proceeded to follow a life of social and racial justice. And so in reference to, since I was elected and sworn in office in 2013, the various groups, actually community groups in Albuquerque, Bernalillo County, and I talked about what we could do to strengthen the accountability and transparency. And this was just part of a larger conversation about what had been already a strong advocacy on the part of vecinos and other groups prior to me even coming to office. And I think Representative Chasey is aware of many of their efforts before the legislature prior to my taking office. And we began to talk about what could be done. And so in 2014, they asked me to introduce a bill, and I'm losing track. I don't recall all the numbers, because the use of excessive force, as long as I've been around as a legislator, has been introduced in various forms throughout the years. We've been before Representative Chasey's Judiciary Committee several times. And each time the bill has improved more and more, but also without taking action, each time our communities have experienced the disproportionate amount of targeting and profiling, racial targeting and profiling, homelessness targeting and profiling, targeting and profiling of the mentally and behavioral of individuals with behavioral and mental concerns. And there was a period of time that you all recall where there was a great deal of, there was massive, I would call it massive, random shootings and deaths associated with excessive force in Albuquerque, giving light to why we have a reform effort now mandated with the city of Albuquerque. And there was a period of time that in 1 year there were 19 shootings, I believe, and 14 of which were Latinos. And so the League of United Latin American Citizens also in the state picked up the activism around this with much more force than it had in the 70s, in the 80s, and the 90s, and the 2000s, only because the excessive force had reached unconscionable numbers. And the community at large felt that something had to be done. And so I raise this because this is a personal as well as social and community importance to me. And most recently, as Senator Sedillo Lopez brought up, Elaine Maestas had her sister, Alicia Lucero, killed, shot 21 times. And Alicia was part of our mental health community that was crying out for help. And instead, she was shot in cold blood. And a year later, as the senator mentioned, there has been no progress made in answering to that shooting. And so there's a multitude of reasons. Most importantly, excessive force. Throughout my 50 plus years of social activism has targeted and been directly related to racial profiling and targeting of the vulnerable communities. And so with all the fervor I have in all my embodiment, I will pursue justice to its fullest degree, not only in this bill, but in any other legislative efforts deemed by the community to be critical in changing the practices that we as communities of color have faced just by merely being associated by the color of our skin. And so this is the reason why I continue to be involved in this legislation, and as I mentioned, any other legislation. So thank you for helping us work through these processes. Thank you for your activism. And I'll now defer to Senator Sedillo Lopez and be open for any questions that the commission has. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sedillo Lopez and Representatives Chasey and Roybal Cabellero. We will open the floor for questions now. I see a few in the chat box, so I can start on calling on those first, and then if you'll raise your hand in the participants panel, I'll ask you to be called on there as well.
Thank you, and I forgot to say something, and I apologize. We just got off, Gail and I just got off the court's, what is it, the Criminal Justice Subcommittee, and came here, but I forgot something pretty important, and that was, I think this is good news. The State Police Department contacted me last week and had, or maybe, anyway, and had some suggestions to make the bill tighter. And what's nice is if they support it, that's going to really go a long way in getting it passed. And we have not worked through their suggestions to determine, the sponsors haven't worked through their suggestions, but they're in the nature of tightening the language so that they don't want to investigate every use of force. They want to do, what did they say? Not excessive. What was it? God, and I don't have their email. But we're going to.
Deadly use of force.
Excuse me?
deadly use of
Deadly,
force.
yeah, they wanted wanted to change the language to deadly use of force that results in great bodily harm or death. And so we're going to work through those changes to determine whether the sponsors can do that. We didn't have time to do that before this presentation, but they did contact us. The SBO contacted us, the State Police Department. And what's great about, like I said, if they support it, and they said they really like the idea of accountability, transparency, but that was huge. I think that they're not going to stand and oppose it, because that would be very hard.
Thank you, Senator. Do you know why they're wanting to limit it to deadly use of force?
Apparently, deadly use of force has meaning to the police. There's definitions of deadly use of force, use of guns, use of the practices like the knee on the chokeholds. So they're very clear on what an inappropriate use of force is, and so they just felt that line would be easier to draw, and that they would not have time if every single use of force was referred to them. They wouldn't have the resources to investigate. They wouldn't have to investigate the appropriate ones, is what I understood them to say.
Thank
They
you.
thought deadly had meaning. And so, like I said, the sponsors of the bill have not discussed this, but I did want to make clear that this suggestion, and the other suggestion they had was, they're the only office in New Mexico that has all of the ballistics capacity, all of the DNA capacity, all of the capacity to do an effective investigation. So in the bill, it takes them out of investigation of their own officers. And they said that would limit other offices, like if Sheriff's Department in Valencia County was trying to do that, they wouldn't have the resources that they need. So they said what they would partner and have the Sheriff's Department be part of or any other agency be part of the investigation, but they needed to make sure that their resources were available for the investigation and not cut their resources out. And I thought that actually was a good point. I didn't know that they were the only ones that had those resources. Again, that's another change that the sponsors have not discussed.
Changes the considerations you're making to the council as we make our decisions. Fatima, did you want to ask your question on Mike?
I think, sorry, my internet is pretty weak today, but I think the senator answered it in the chat box and then over to here. Thank you, Alexandria.
Thank you. And Corinne, did you want to ask your question on Mike? No. Any other questions or comments from the council that you would like to ask the panel? I do see a question in the chat box from the chair of our health subcommittee, Hussein bin Bilal, asking how can we get those definitions of excessive use of force and deadly force, what those actual formal definitions would be.
Shouldn't the definitions be included in the bill that they sent?
That's absolutely right. That I think if we were going to do that, we'd have to include it in the bill and not have somebody running around looking for other definitions.
One of the things we're going to discuss at our last meeting on November 16th is, I hope we're going to have time for it. I want to review the George Floyd bill that the U.S. House of Representatives passed and see if there is any language there that we might want to lift. Not necessarily for this, but for this and other measures.
Thank you.
I would just add that it is incredibly important that the definitions be not only addressed, but that they represent and should actually represent the intent as always, of what we want to accomplish with the bill. And that's so very important. So even though we haven't had a great deal of time to talk amongst the sponsors of the bill, that would be something that I would be looking at, as I guess all of us would be, very closely as to how it relates to what it is that we're attempting to do. Because I in no way would be committed to minimizing the importance of what we're trying to do or reducing the mission which the senator brought up, and that was the transparency, accountability, and the timeliness. Because as we've seen, there is quite a distinction between using the terminology in broader terms of excessive force. And as I mentioned in this bill, it's taken many different forms, and we started off with some very broad terms for a reason. And it was in response to social, to the community. And then it's become a little bit more narrow, because as we've addressed this issue, we've had various law enforcement entities as now step up and say, and there's been a change in climate. And so they now are offering, which I'm glad, suggestions. However, it still needs to be, in my opinion, within the realm of the overall protections and insurances of removing exactly what has contributed to excessive use of force or deadly use of force. And that's why it has to go very closely hand in hand with the training and other considerations. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I just pulled up the definition here of deadly force. That degree of force which is reasonably likely to cause death or great bodily harm. The use of deadly force must be the direct cause of death or great bodily harm and not merely the proximate cause. So that would address somebody, just to explain that difference. If somebody had a heart condition and then the police officer pulled a gun on that person and the person died, that would not be included, because that would not be the direct harm. Does that make sense? That would be the proximate cause. I just also want to, I'm very glad that we have you to give input on this, and I'm glad I was able to pull up the state police suggestions, because I definitely want to hear your input on the bill and the suggestions as we move forward.
Thank you. Dr. Patel.
Hello, thank you for your presentations. My question is about whether, if this bill is passed, would localities have to renegotiate their contracts with their local law enforcement, or would this kind of now being, if it were passed, be state law, and, you know, obviously then the contracts would have to abide by the state law, but I'm just wondering like what that looks like in terms of renegotiating contracts, the current contracts, and also in line with that, who seemed to be the most, like the opposition that you had faced in presenting this last year?
Well, when I did SB 100 the year before, it didn't even, the police officer, nobody supported it. Nobody would even talk to me. And then when I did SB 17, all of a sudden, the AG's office, and I give all the credit to the movements, to the community, and to everybody for highlighting it. Then all of a sudden, the Attorney General's office started paying attention to the bill, trying to make it workable from their perspective. And I was absolutely stunned to get the state police to call us and to give their input. Because if we go into the legislature with a bill that's supported by those and the community, which is very, very important, this bill will pass. That will really enhance the likelihood that it would pass. A lot of our colleagues would just not support a bill that the police don't support or that they stand in opposition to. So I really give credit to the movement and to your body for really waking people up to the need for this bill and making the police departments and the AG's office realize this is going to happen. And as you point out, if this is state law, all of the contracts, I assume, I haven't read all of them, but most contracts require that they be in accord with state law. So I don't think that it would require renegotiation.
And I will also add, if I may, that I've been on many different community policing meetings that are held at the neighborhood level, and changing an administration's mindset. When you change an administration, hopefully you change their mindset. It also changes their approaches. And in this case, I have seen a significant improvement in how policing is being viewed from a community policing perspective. And that's very different than when I first came into office and we were under another administration. It also is a reflection of our Attorney General. There's been a change, and our Attorney General has changed. That's part of the administration change that I'm alluding to. So leadership at the helm really speaks to how much opposition there will be and who will be affected. Now, someone mentioned earlier about the sheriffs. That's probably a whole discussion on their own, because we know there's different legal relationships there. However, the bodies that represent the people and that actually work hand in hand with wanting to make sure that safety and security is first and foremost by our communities. Those are the bodies that I would really be looking at in terms of stepping up and supporting, which is why the state police was an important body to step forward. And then we had a guest on the behavioral health subcommittee of the interim committees, who was also from the Albuquerque Police Department, who emphasized that they do have the leadership in place. And not only that, but they have the systems and processes now in place where a great deal of attention is going to be given to how they respond and to the whole notion of use of force, as well as elevating the importance of community and individuals versus shoot first and ask questions later, or shoot to kill tactics that have been used in the past. So that really heartens me in terms of seeing this bill and this legislation move forward. Thank you.
Thank you both, Senator and Representative. Austin, I wanted to ask if you wanted to come on mic to ask your question, and then Councilor Bencomo.
Sure. Sorry, I'm not on camera right now. I'll be on in just a second. But so as far as the use of force, so you did specify that it was the deadly use of force where it is directly related to loss of life. But how does that, like how would that be taken into account when it comes to like somebody with a heart attack or a heart condition, and then like the excessive use of tasers and stuff like that, or the worsening of potential pre-existing conditions by use of tear gas and other less than lethal uses of like enforcement of whatever use of force. Sorry. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. That's what they want to limit, is when the police officer is not aware that, so if there is a use of a taser and it's appropriate, given the circumstances, and that's what's part of the training. One of the things we talked about this morning with the academy is they train for the minimum force, the minimum use of force necessary under the situation, and they do training on that. However, Police departments have their own policies and training. So even though the police academy does not approve of chokeholds, does not teach chokeholds, that doesn't mean that a particular sheriff's department would not teach chokeholds. And so that's a different bill, not this bill, would be to outlaw the use of chokeholds, outlaw the use of those inappropriate things, and maybe give guidance, give some good guidance. And that's what we were talking about this morning, so that the police understand that they should not have a military mentality of us versus them. They should have the mentality of the least use of force that is necessary to bring peace under the circumstances. Did I answer that? I don't know. I think I went off a little bit.
No, I think that is accurate, and I think related to the question I'm asking. And I think that the interest being, like, I understand that we don't want that to be for every single case, and obviously the minimum like available force and necessary force being like the best practice, but also when it is related to loss of life, like will those be evaluated anyway?
Yes.
Because there is question over whether or not it's necessary to, let's say, tase a sleeping homeless man would not be appropriate. So whether or not it would be immediately weeded out, or whether the outcome of the use of force would necessitate that investigation.
I think that's a very important point. It's death or great bodily harm, so that it would trigger an investigation. Whether the person would be prosecuted, would depend on what the investigation showed. But if the easy example for me is if somebody had a heart condition and they were, I don't know, why would you need to restrain him? And there was somehow a need to restrain this individual, and it was necessary under the circumstances to taser this individual, and the police officer had no idea about the heart condition. That's the kind of thing you want to separate out, that would be discipline or other, another kind of procedure, but not necessarily go through the whole process of that this bill will trigger. And so that's specifically what they wanted to narrow and to ensure. And that's what Representative Roybal Cabellero was talking about, is having a line, having a clear line that would make some uses of force, excessive use of deadly force that results in great bodily harm or death, go forward with this process. And if it was less than that, it would be up to local discipline, or, but there would be an investigation in all cases.
Thank you. Councillor Bencomo, and then I see you, Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you so much, Alex. Hi, representatives and senators. Thanks for joining us. Joanna Bencomo, City Councilor in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And just going off of Austin's questions, I think as we're talking about this, I do consider, for example, the case of Mr. George Floyd, where there was an attempt to, sort of say that his underlying health conditions had played a role in what happened. And so what measures are there in place to really ensure that there's a clear investigation that goes into place, so that it is not simply said, well, that person had a health condition, so that's not on us, right? Like, what are the good accountability measures put in place to make sure that does not happen?
That's what's important about having the independent investigation, but it's not the department investigating their own. And so that's the accountability piece that was crucial to me, that they can't allege crap like that.
Yes, thank you. I was curious, actually, on that same vein, in terms of the Department of Public Safety, and would this independent investigation be conducted by state police officers? Do you feel like that's somewhat concerning as well, or what kind of measures are put in place to ensure there's no bias in the investigation?
Because they're not members of the sheriff's department or the police officers that would be investigated, they are independent. They work with the AG's office, and so the idea is that there would be two sets of eyes: the AG's office and the DA's office, and the independent police department. So you wouldn't have, like, I don't know, I'm picking on Valencia County because I'm from there. You wouldn't have the sheriff of Valencia County investigated by the sheriff of Valencia County and prosecuted by the district attorney of that judicial district. So that's the idea. That's the way we enhance accountability without creating an independent group. I've learned a lot about the Department of Safety. They have all of the resources and labs and ballistics, and they have the supreme ability to conduct these investigations. And that's something I didn't know, that most departments in the state do not have.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I think there's for sure perhaps a longer term conversation, but that I think your bill sort of raises a really good opportunity to discuss the ways in which police departments are investigated. And forever, it has been by other police, right? And so I think that creates this like vicious circle of impunity that we've seen over and over. So I think the more there can be in terms of who is investigating what circumstance, and that be as diverse as possible in terms of not just police officers, I think is really good. And then my last question, you actually touched on it, was in terms of resources. You know, on our last call 2 weeks ago, I'd asked for this council to get some sort of briefing on the state's budget, on how much the state spends on public safety. And so I'm curious, in terms of the Department of Public Safety, you know, how much of their resources are geared towards, and like crime prevention, or geared towards investigations like this that would possibly yield in accountability and oversight of other police departments.
Well, my understanding from them is there is actually an elite unit within the Department of Safety, within the state police, that focuses on this. They get specialized training. They as I said, it's an elite unit that focuses on this kind of investigation when they're brought in. So this would make it so that they're brought in every time. And they're also, these are the best police officers, the ones that don't have a history of violence. One of the things that I've learned from talking to them is many police officers are very disturbed by the excessive use of force. And so that's the kind of thing you want to build in, is these are people who are going to go after it. Now, there's corruption everywhere, I don't have to tell you. You know, but this bill tries to take it, you know, make sure that more than one department is looking at it, more than one district attorney is looking at it, because that's when you have two sets of eyes, it's less likely that you have corruption than when you have one entity acting alone.
So,
thank you.
If I could just add real quickly for clarification, just so everyone, as I mentioned in the my presentation, this has been evolving throughout the years, and it's and this has been a point of intense discussion with various community groups. Particularly, I can speak to them here in Albuquerque and Bernalillo County, and perhaps even some in Doña Ana. There's been a tremendous loss of faith, or whatever you want to call it, trust in our law enforcement, and I totally understand and agree. And so there was a point in one of the bills, I think it was the one that I introduced in 2014, that called for a complete independent body, complete outside of law enforcement, outside of attorney generals, outside of DAs. It was considered the ultimate far left of left that could be presented. And but there were components in it, and we've had this discussion with the senator and others. There were components of it that have been weaved in with that consideration. I think the intent was to force us to look at that third eye. That third eye, though, does not necessarily have to fall into law enforcement itself or to what is perceived as law enforcement. And then oftentimes district attorneys and even the attorney general, but more so the district attorneys, are viewed as having an intricate relationship with law enforcement. Obviously, they have to, given the nature of their work. And then, of course, we have sheriffs and as an independent body completely out on their own. And so we rely on the attorney general as being the body for the people, representing the people, to be that third eye. And so, but there's still that viewpoint that it needs to be outside of that entire realm. And so we're aware of that. However, we have to weigh, and this is where you all and your recommendations come in that are very valuable for myself, and I'm sure all of us comes in, is that we have to weigh what is most beneficial, what will provide the most safety and security to the vast majority of the community, the most vulnerable populations that are being preyed upon in this manner. I would relay and give heavy weight to what your feedback would be in reviewing this bill, reviewing the previous bills, all the previous bills, perhaps, and seeing what would be your recommendations. Because for me, it is much more important to get the protections in place that are going to protect the right people. Which are obviously those in the community that are suffering death and great bodily harm associated with these. So I would welcome that review and suggestions, and to see perhaps, I mean, there's all the more eyes and involved in these processes, the better, as I said, they get. And so I would really welcome your suggestions and recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. And then that's going to be our last question for this panel today.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Make sure my volume is on. Yeah. Thank you. I want to first thank the legislators, because a lot of times people think because they're elected official, they're immune from people pushing back on you or retaliation. So thank you. I know the risks that you take to serve our community, and sometimes you are targets by hateful acts. So thank you for that. I want to mention two pieces in this that I think our council members together, that we can help you hold the bill together, because as we know in the legislature, it becomes making sausage. And sometimes to get something done and to get people on board, we give something up. And I think this is where we see maybe law enforcement coming. They're going to want the deadly use of force resulting in great bodily harm, death in there. But I think for this council to embrace this legislation and then give you that power when you go into legislature, so that you're not the target. The council was recommending that we keep both, that it has to have the excessive force, because where we're seeing victims happen is when somebody then reveals to the police, like George Floyd did about being claustrophobic. If we've used the example of somebody having a heart condition, if they mention to them, I have a heart condition, now that excessive force has become deadly force. We got to have you don't give up the two. We got to have excessive force in there, and of course the deadly use of force. They want to get away from the excessive, because this is where many times where we think they want to claim as accidents take place, but it's intentional. It is intentional. And the intentional use of pushing out on someone, that person now is being put in a category where they're very vulnerable, and this is to protect our vulnerable population. So on those two pieces, I think the council, we ought to stick to it. We want both of those. We want both of those pieces in there for you, and that it be written in. And then when it goes to the legislature, our word is behind you, and you can push back and say, we're not going to give up that excessive force. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. And thank you, Senator Sedillo Lopez, Representative Roybal, Cabellero, and Representative Chasey. This is a really important conversation. As a part of that accountability piece, I'm also thinking about, what's happened in the Breonna Taylor case and the accountability for then the prosecuting body, which is an extension of law enforcement, and how often these cases are also sealed through that process. And so how we address these systems in this continuum of way that investigates itself and then prosecutes itself, I think is really important to consider in this legislation and other legislation addressing this issue. So thank you for your time today. Yes, Senator Lopez.
I just wanted to, was seeing in the comment, because we just gave you the bill now. Yes, we would like feedback. And it would also, if you have ideas for how to make the investigation more independent, I'm knowing that we don't have the resources to create an elite unit, that I'm not necessarily excited about bringing the FBI in. But, that's another can of worms. But because that's also what happens is the FBI come in. So think about it. And if you have suggestions or ideas, it would be very helpful to us. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity to present this draft of the bill to you. What you got is what was introduced in SB 17. Any way that we can make, in the special session, any way that we can make it better is great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. Representative Chasey, I wanted to clarify the work of this council is not ending November 18th. That's just one of our goals, to have legislative recommendations to the governor by then.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. So we have had several members join us since we opened the meeting. And so I'll reiterate what I stated at the beginning of the meeting. One of our goals or one of our tasks is we would like to, by November 18th, be able to present legislative priorities and recommendations to the governor and the governor's office by that council meeting on November 18th. And so including this meeting, that leaves us 3 meetings to review legislation or proposed legislation to recommend to the council. And the subcommittees are also charged in working on getting this council recommendations for consideration so that we can continue that work. As a part of that, on our agenda now, we're moving into subcommittee report outs. And one of the things that we want to consider and take action on is how we can form groups that can work on some of these issues that continue to come up on all 4 groups, so that we can have some substantive conversations and really start going deeper into the issues to arrive at some of those recommendations. And so we would like, to have 2 to 3 council members from the Central Council who may join with subcommittee members who are also interested in similar issues. And so, Amy, did you want to speak more on that and how that would serve to move some of this forward? You're muted, Amy.
I'm muted.
I keep hitting other people's mute and I forget about my own. So as Alexandria was saying, right, like we really want to be able to use the very limited amount of time we have to be able to move things forward, so that when we get to our November 18th meeting, that we have some real concrete things that you all have had a chance to look at and you all have had a chance to think about, so that when we are at the meeting on the 18th, we can really get down to what do we move forward as suggestions to the governor or to other offices that we have thought about giving suggestions to. So what we would like to do is pull out those things that have become very clear that many members of the council and members of the subcommittees are interested in looking at, and being able to set up a subcommittee of the subcommittee, or, you know, a little working group, maybe we should call it, to really come together. We want probably less than 5 people on each of those working groups, and that they would be folks who would draft a kind of briefing memo, we'll call it, that can then really be something that we can have time to process before a meeting, digest, and come together to have conversation and eventually decide how we want to move those things forward. So if I can just use an example that we want to bring forward today, and we're bringing it forward today because unfortunately we are on a time crunch for this, right? So that in the last education subcommittee meeting, one of the presentations provided for us an option for what we could do, and that option was to really provide some interview questions and suggestions for selection on the Regents process. And as we started looking into that Regents process, we learned that they actually will be doing selections for Regents in the next 3 weeks. So unfortunately, we weren't able to wait on a timeline for this. So the education subcommittee quickly through email came up with a briefing memo, which I emailed to you all just before this meeting. And again, apologies for that, but you know, we send things out as soon as we have them. And so what we would like to do is turn that to this council to really have conversation about. And that's the same way we would do this with these other working groups, right? So ones that we have kind of pulled up, and I think, you know, these are just ones that we've kind of seen, but if you all have other ideas, we're super open to them, is that we really thought we should create a working group on data, right? What are the reports that we really feel the governor should be looking at, what numbers she should be looking at, what different departments, state departments and entities should be giving those numbers. And so we could have a small working group of two people from the council, and then 2 people or 3 people from the subcommittees be a working group to really draft something on that, draft an idea on that, and then bring that to the council for further discussion. So that's really the kind of process we're looking at, so that we can move things forward, because we don't necessarily have a lot of time right now left, right? We have, I think, 3, maybe 4 meetings left before we want to finalize these decisions for our suggestions on November 18th.
Thank you, Amy. And so how would you like folks to, how would you like for that to be organized, and for folks to essentially sign up to participate on one of those subgroups?
So if we can use the meeting today to kind of list the subgroups that we've already decided, you know, if there are any others that people want to add to that list, I will take notes and make those clear, and then we will send it out to the whole council for you to be able to, you know, choose the one that you'd like to be a participant in. Again, we want to keep these work groups small, so it'll be really easy for us to, you know, draft some things without, you know, too many people, and not having too much difficulty in scheduling those. So please only choose one, or choose one and give me your, you know, alternate decisions that you'd want to be on. And then between Alexandria, Shawnee, Kaylee, and Tammy will work out, you know, the different groups and who should all be on them.
Thank you.
Amy, we have Senator O'Neill here.
Yeah. Thank you, Shawnee. Move to that now. We'll go to the groups after we have Senator Bill O'Neill on as our second group of guests to discuss racial impact evaluation legislation. Hello,
Okay.
Neil.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, say hello to your mom, the legendary Deborah Taylor, okay? Just tell her I said hello. Okay. So anyway, well, thanks for this council. It's long overdue, and thank you for all your hard work. Thank you in advance, because I know you've got a lot of work to do. But I just wanted to give you an update on the bill that I am going to sponsor at the upcoming session. I want to thank Catherine Jokums, is she on this Zoom call? She's my constituent who brought it in front of who basically not only told me that we should do this, but she did a lot of research on it. And yes, she's here as an attendee. That's great, Catherine. So basically, it's pretty straightforward. Any bill that is introduced in our legislature that's criminal justice related, we want to require a racial impact statement as a part of the fiscal impact statement provided by the New Mexico Sentencing Commission. Now, I thought, in the Senate, we've been doing the fiscal impact for any criminal justice related bill, especially when they're enhancement bills, which a lot of them are. And routinely, if my memory serves me correctly, we have, and maybe it's not in statute, which is a change that this would affect. Any criminal justice reform bill was referred to the Senate Finance Committee, where it clearly had a fiscal impact. So, to me, this is just hand in hand in that tradition. Let's do a racial impact statement. Other states have done this. And again, I want to thank Catherine for flagging this for me. Very excited about this bill. And of course, very interested in feedback from the council, the commission here, suggestions. As many of you know, we're early in the process. This is a discussion draft. I would like to present it in front of the full criminal justice CCJ committee at its last meeting for endorsement. I do believe my bill drafter, Elizabeth, is live streaming this. So anyway, I'm all ears. I believe most of you hopefully have at least seen a summary of the bill. So I'm here to listen. So that's kind of what I'm here doing. And thank you. So apologize for being late.
Thank you for being here. Are we able to drop the link into that? Is there a link on the legislative website to that?
Pardon?
Senator, so we can hear one. Oh, you're good. I believe Amy did send out the PDF that we had that was a draft. I don't believe it's available on the legislative website at this time. Is that accurate? Okay.
Okay. So that PDF has been sent out. And I wanted to acknowledge that Catherine is on as an attendee. So thank you for being here, Catherine. Senator, could you give us just like a high-level overview of what's included in the language of the bill?
It's simple. It's basically saying any kind of what I just said. It's a short bill, actually, for us. It's 3 pages in its current form. But it's basically, look, if it's a criminal justice related bill, it needs to have a racial impact statement. And then I think what we want to do is define what a racial impact statement is. So again, we have a great group of bill drafters, and they're all attorneys. And so I know Elizabeth is very invested in this bill and probably listening right now, but more live streaming. So we're just all ears at what people want to see. I guess the main thing I can do is keep you posted when I actually present the bill in its prime time form at the last committee meeting. I think it's in November, the CCJ committee. So I can make sure I can just keep you in the loop as it evolves. But I wanted you to know that this is happening, and so I'm very excited about it, very committed to it. And so it's just it's just the right thing to do. And I'm hopeful, I'm confident that I know we'll get a lot of traction once it's introduced, and hopefully we can pass it and get it signed into law.
Thank you.
One thing, I think currently as the bill stands, I kind of got involved in this because I was just doing my own research online and wanted to see what kind of a change I could make in my own community. Hi, Senator. And I think currently as the bill stands, we are seeking to require racial impact statements for any new sentencing bills in particular. So there are other states that have broader scopes in terms of which new bills require racial impact statements. There are other states that have narrower scopes. Currently, we are looking at specifically for any new sentencing bills, just in case that clarifies anything.
Thank you. And I want to open the floor to the council for any questions or comments. Racial impact assessments are something that have come up on every single council and committee. And so I want to open the floor for that. Representative William Stapleton.
Hi, good afternoon. My question relates to Senator O'Neill in regards to on the racial impact statement that's going to be in the legislation that is required. Do you anticipate or foresee any drawbacks just from that statement from the public itself? Bill? Senator O'Neill?
Yes. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Well, I think with a lot of this, I believe it's an educational process. People need to understand why this is necessary. I think, given our current political climate, I think people are receptive to that. And again, I just can't thank Catherine enough for taking the initiative to contact me. We already do this in a way. We do it for the fiscal impact on these bills, and Representative, as you know, a lot of these bills are enhancement bills. Sentencing bills are so often enhancement bills that make everybody feel good because we're going to give more time to the crime, but it doesn't really solve the problem. So I think this would be a really, really effective way to counteract that dynamic that both you and I have seen in the halls of the legislature. So to answer your question, I'm not anticipating a lot of resistance. Well, I mean, you never know, but I think it's what I like about this is we already do this with the fiscal impact, which is translated with these enhancement bills. Oftentimes, they end up costing the state a lot of money. So, since we're doing this already, and I like the Sentencing Commission dynamic that, as you know, we really respect them. They're very great. They're a very good entity and work closely with us at the legislature. So I guess I see it more. It's up to me and the advocates to educate folks as to why this is important, why it's necessary.
So, Senator, has this been discussed in the criminal justice subcommittees anywhere in the courts and corrections?
No, but I plan on doing it because I wanted to have a final draft. As you know, you just want to have your best foot forward, so to speak. So I fully anticipate, I've requested a hearing on it at that last meeting that I keep referring to, and that's that last CCJ interim committee meeting. So I'm sure I'll get a lot of feedback then and get a sense of any possible opposition. But the good news is that I'm going to go for endorsement. So you can join the committee that day if you want. You could be a guest legislator. Maybe I have to keep you posted on that. So anyway,
why don't you just let me know when it's coming up in that committee?
Okay, will do.
I'd be anxious to hear and be concerned. I think it's a great idea and a great concept. I know that you and I both know what happens once we come up with great ideas and present them in the legislature.
Right.
It winds down to a cup of coffee with no cookies with it.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, it's Representative, Majority Leader.
I will also say back to your first question, one thing that I discovered online is that these types of bills typically aren't really met with a lot of resistance. For example, one of the first states to pass one of these bills was Iowa, which I was very surprised about, but it didn't get a lot of resistance in Iowa. It came after there was a report showing the disparity of how African Americans, how they were disparately being convicted of these certain types of crimes. So that's kind of one of the things that drew me to this idea as well, is it's not super controversial because you can get a racial impact statement. If you're requiring the statement, the lawmakers can read it, they can go through it and consider it. That doesn't mean we have to throw this bill out the window. It's a further informational piece to kind of create a better bill that could be better tailored to basically get a better result and try to avoid disparate impact upon certain races.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Representative and Senator. I see Fatima and then Austin.
Hi, thank you all so much for the presentation. And if my internet goes out, Alexandria, just feel free to interrupt me. So I think just in looking at the bill, I just wanted to ask and clarify its impact on any marijuana legislation and legalization. Just knowing that in other states, we know so many people of color are still in prison while marijuana is legalized and other people are making money. So just kind of clarifying from what I saw that it would look like that would be considered part of that if it's a change in sentencing or something that's considered a legality. And then I had one other question, which was just beyond, and this might be pie in the sky, but beyond just the criminal justice system, is there a way to really talk about racial impact statements more broadly and looking at things in health and human services or even oil and gas and mining legislation and really start talking about with all of our legislation, how can we have racial impact statements and assessments, because we just know that criminal justice is not in a silo. We know that data on social determinants of health really indicates that all of these things then impact our outcomes and then also impact how we intersect with the criminal justice system. So I guess my question is, how do we talk about extending this to all legislation? And I remember, I think it was last legislative session, there was a moment with the Energy Transition Act where there was actually an apology because it seemed like there were no Navajo voices in some of that legislation and things like that, which seem really egregious. So just wondering your perspective on that, if there's a way to extend this even more. Thank you.
Excellent point. Thank you so much for that input. I think speaking for Jacqueline, for Catherine and myself, I think our idea is to get it started. This is the first step, and this would literally pave the way for future such, expanding this. It's a logical place to start. So that's excellent and very good point about the marijuana. And my assumption is that it would definitely involve that because of the sentencing dynamic. But thank you so much, and definitely we'll keep you posted on this. But I really appreciate that input.
Austin.
Yeah, and so my first question, and I just read through the bill like kind of cursory, but I couldn't quite find out where it was housed, whether it would be housed underneath the LSC, the Council Service, or LCS, and if so, whether or not that would have a fiscal impact itself. I think is important to know, just knowing that we're probably going to be heading into a pretty rough budget year, that there may not be any ability to fund additional stuff. So where it would be housed, I think I'm curious about that. And also just to underline exactly what Fatima just said about, we know that there are disparate impacts for health outcomes for communities of color, specifically Native American communities. And again, just like the ETA, we have to be cognizant of the fact that it is not a new thing. It is a systemic disposition that we're moving towards, like criminalization and people having a harder time getting to economic parity, and that is a key factor in your ability to stay out of the criminal reparation system or whatever. It is an important step to remember that corrections is usually the last step in a process of criminalization. So making sure that we're not going to the end of the pipeline and saying, well, we're seeing that the numbers are weird here. Why are they weird here? And making sure that the legislation has room to expand to include a much greater picture of why those disparities exist.
Thank you, Austin. Again, that's a great point. I wish my bill drafter was on the Zoom, but I will follow up with her with exactly where it's housed. And yeah, everything seems to have a fiscal impact statement, any bill that we introduce, but I think it would be minimal. The Sentencing Commission is already doing a lot of work in this area. That's what I really like about this. The way it is right now is that it's already established a lot of these processes. So, but excellent points, and just know that we're deeply committed to this bill, and I will make sure you are in the loop. Okay. Are you Sonny's son?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right, thank you. Say hello to him as well.
Thank you. Room for one more question or comment if there's anyone. Dr. Sorry, I don't know if it's the new hands.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You will go Bishop Cooper and then Dr. Patel.
Hello, Senator.
Hi there.
I had a couple questions. So, of course, when we're talking about racial fiscal impact, are we connecting this as it relates to the disparity as it relates to family, environment, mental health? Also, when we start talking about what is the fiscal impact of incarceration, and I am a little bit different in that I don't mind us starting at the back of the pipeline, because I think if we can embrace what has already happened, so that when we start talking about not just new laws, but even laws that's already on the book that were have developed an impact in our community as it relates to single parent families, loss of income, loss of rights, loss of job opportunity because of some of the previous laws that were written, and now people are incarcerated and they come out with a record and it's harder for them to get a job, and it just has so many social deterrents in it. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, and that's an excellent point. I mean, I think it would be hard logistically to make it retroactive, but if we're going to go down this road, why wouldn't we at least, discuss that, and maybe there's a way of doing that, because some of these laws that are on the books are just terrible in that form. I mean, all I know is I kind of keep getting back to this and just have to start somewhere, and this is an excellent, if passed, this would be an excellent start. But, and then for the first part of your question, I would say, yes, I mean, the families and the histories, the family histories and drug addiction and God knows what else. Just so the commission knows, I was the executive director of the State Juvenile Parole Board for 3 years under Bill Richardson. So I work closely with all incarcerated juveniles, by those incarcerated under CYFD custody to the state. So I'm really aware of these dynamics, and it would be, it would be the right thing to do as a legislator to try to get these dynamics in policy, in legislation. But that's an excellent point, and I really appreciate the input. So again, this really helps kind of, honestly, it helps me understand the bill that I'm introducing. I mean, these are excellent points, and just want to keep everybody posted, and by all means, as this, I'm hopeful that this will get some publicity, and by all means, feel free to contact me directly with suggestions.
Thank you, Senator. Final question or comment, Dr. Patel.
Just what do you how do we kind of ensure quality and understanding of like critical race theory conversation, or is it going to be something that will be presented by the authors of the bill?
Okay, well, thank you, Darshan. And we have a lot of faith in our sentencing commission. I mean, you kind of have to work with what you've got. And the sentencing commission is a big part of the legislature every time. And it has a really good tradition. We respect its findings. Representative Stapleton can attest to the fact these fiscal impact statements are often, when they're not through the sentencing commission, they're usually through analysts from different committees, and a lot of times they're really mystifying. But what I like about, again, the sentencing commission having a great deal of expertise in this area, so I think that your commission can be rest assured that while not everybody's fallible, I really, and maybe Representative Stapleton can speak to this, but I think it's a really good group to be doing these fiscal impact reports, because it's not even a fiscal impact, it's a racial impact. So it's just something that's right up their alley, I would assume. But again, and I keep saying this, but I just think this is a good place to start. And we can always, if there are issues that arise, in the implementation of this bill, for example, then we can, get into how to make it, how to include very much these valid points that you're raising. But as a start off, it seems to be a good place to start.
Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing this legislation to the council today. I think just as was shared by Mr. Sanchez to the last panel, I think one of the things of importance to the council is to look at everything from the broadest impact that it will have, and really addressing racism at the institutional and systematic levels. And so some of the recommendations, should the council choose to add this to our recommendations, will probably come out much more broader, like you heard shared today, and recognizing that a start may be looking at sentencing, but that we're really committed to addressing racism in the very institutionalized and systemic way, in the broadest way across our state. And so our suggestions are probably going to come out much broader than just this one focus on sentencing. So thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you being here. And thank you, Catherine, for your advocacy and for being here as well. Appreciate you all. Okay, deep breath. So we have about 25 minutes left in today's meeting, and we want to get to those subgroup report outs. There is the ask that Amy mentioned that's coming from the education subcommittee around the Board of Regents. And so, Amy, is there someone to talk about that specifically?
What I'm going to do is, I did email this out to folks, but I'm going to also share it on our screen right now. And so what the education subcommittee had really talked about is that the regents are a huge part of making racial equity part of the decision-making process in higher education, right? And so that a lot of things that we talk about as far as moving forward racial equity can be decided on for the regions. And so that's one of the reasons why we really thought that this should be a priority area, you know, really making sure that we're developing a racial equity lens in decisions by the leadership level at our state higher education institutions. And so what they have put together is this suggestion. You know, normally we would put data and all these other things in here, but like I said earlier, we really got notice yesterday that we could bring this forward and have an impact on this appointment that's about to happen. They're going to be doing the interviews in a couple of weeks. And as many of you may know, regents are selected for a 6-year period. So we felt like it was really important for us to push this forward right now. So the suggestion really is that for this committee right now that is going to be interviewing very shortly, that the selection process involves the below questions, but also we wanted to be able to move forward the collection of racial equity information. So we've also asked for there to be a collection of the demographic information on all those folks who have been selected for interviews, not just the ones who have been selected for the position. So we are suggesting that the questions be added to the interview process. I'm going to leave those there for you all to read to yourselves, but that also what we do is we, you know, ask for a demographic survey, which is at the bottom of this. And so I'm going to stop there and go ahead and see if we want to open that up to discussion now.
Thank you, Amy. And I apologize, I can't tell if these are new hands or ones that have remained up. So I'm going to just call on them in the order that they appear. Representative William Stapleton, did you have a question or comment regarding this? Dr. Patel, is that a new hand? No, okay. Councilor Bencomo.
Thank you. I did. That was a hand. Yes, I have a couple questions. Do you are the once folks are interviewed, are those public? Like, are then some of these things made public for the people who were selected?
Which items would be public? You mean the answers to the questions or what?
Yeah, I guess, right. Like I guess I'm wondering about like, what's the outcome of this? So like, or I guess I'm thinking like, let's say there's like not a great candidate, perhaps in these areas, but in other areas they're a good candidate and they're selected. What's sort of the outcome or consequence of having someone who doesn't have a clear racial equity lens in one of these positions?
Well, I mean, I think, right, in a philosophical way, what's the impact is that our higher education institutions aren't having decisions made from a racial equity lens. But that for us, and in this right here, we're really talking about a small move that we're trying to make right now. You know, it's a tiny step on the huge path of racial justice. And so we're asking to kind of, you know, be involved in the selection process that is going to happen in a couple of weeks. I don't know that with this amount of time, we're able to make any like strong requirements, right? Like you have to have this, that these questions and the request to ask for the demographic information is, I think, really around getting the selection committee to be thinking in the same way that if we had people from this committee on that selection committee, right? And so again, this is just something we had to draft it really quickly because we didn't have a lot of time, but I invite you all to put other things in here that you might think are important, right? You know, if you wanted to say, we want someone from the Council for Racial Justice to be in the interview process, I think that's something we can put forward on this suggestion, you know, and again, you know, getting to what you're saying is that might have a little bit larger impact. But at this point, right, I don't think that there's anything that we have suggested or has come up yet that says every single person who gets selected is going to have a racial equity lens.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah. And then my only other comment would, because I think this is really great, would be for, and I know that like, much like the previous conversation we just had, that this could be blanket to a lot of other things. I feel like this is really similar to that. And I think right now correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we have currently a Secretary of Public Safety. And I wonder if something similar like this could be applied to the hiring of that person. And that was it. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Bencomo. And this is something that just came to the attention from the Education Subcommittee, which is why we're bringing it to the Central Committee kind of in such a short fashion. Senator Lopez, I see your hand.
Thank you. Questions, I think they're spot on. And what we have tried to do, I've served as the chair of the Senate Rules Committee for many years. And these are some of the questions that we do ask during the committee hearing. We don't always get an answer that some of us are wanting to hear, but we always try and defer also to the governor for her appointments to these positions. At times, if there's somebody who's really controversial, I will raise the issue and that person doesn't get heard. But I think it's important that these questions are presented for the governor to ask. She does have Department of Public Safety, the Secretary, Higher Education also needs a secretary. We'll have a new Department of Health secretary coming in also. And I think there's another one also, I forget, I don't have my list in front of me, but there will be some new secretaries that'll be brought in front of the Senate this coming legislative session. And I think these questions can also, I'll be glad to make sure that they're shared with the committee and whoever's the chair at that time also to make sure that this is something that we bring in front of as from the Senate's point of view, because that's kind of the last stop in that process of regent appointments. I just wanted to share that, and I think these are great. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lopez. When are the interviews, Amy? Do we have a date of when that process is?
I don't think we have a date yet. When I was having this conversation yesterday, she said in 3 weeks. So I think they're in the process right now of setting those and all of that. If I can suggest that maybe what we do is what we had talked about earlier, is forming a work group of less than 5 folks. I know that there is already someone on our education subcommittee who would like to be on that work group to really sit down and, you know, dig into these and process all of the suggestions. And then if maybe we can send it to email, but also understanding that we do have a little less time than this than in the other work groups where we're talking about bringing that forward by November 18th.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. And we're taking notes, Margaret. I see your comment in the chat box here. So I think the first step is to ask if the council, and I can't see everyone right now, but ask if the council agrees with moving forward with creating these suggestions for the interview process. If you can give a thumbs up or put the hand up in the participants list.
And Madam Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes, Senator Lopez.
And this is I'm what I was talking about, and I apologize. This is good. Someone just mentioned that these are good questions to use for the board of but also for those who are going to be running each of our departments in the state. So that's where my advocacy was also. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lopez. Yes, I'll include that in this ask right now, that this applies for the Board of Regents and the upcoming processes for the hiring of secretaries, or the review of secretaries. So again, if you'll put your thumb up or the hand in the participant box. Thank you, Amy, so I can see. Awesome. Is there any dissent at this time? Okay. And then do we have... Is that Dr.
Say,
Patel?
if there, we had a similar group that at UNM Hospital, we interviewed new candidates for our executive vice president, and some of the questions were specific toward New Mexico's history on race, and so maybe the subgroup can think about that, about how to tailor some of the conversation specifically to the issues faced in our state.
Thank you. So do you want to be on that side, Dr. Patel?
Happy to forward along the questions that we asked to the subcommittee.
Okay. Then do we have folks who are interested in being on that work group? It's probably going to be formed immediately because we're working with a tight time. And so do we have the 3 council members that would like to participate on that subgroup with members from the education subcommittee?
I have a comment. I don't necessarily want to be on the committee. I think it's an excellent document. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, just my one concern is that when we list race on this particular sheet, there's not African or African American descent question. We have Hispanic origin, tribal, and Native American, but we don't have African American or African descent. If we could include that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. Any other council members that at this time would be willing to volunteer to participate on the subgroup to discuss?
This is Jennifer. I will.
Thank you, Jennifer.
And we'll have Nancy Lopez from the Education Subcommittee will also be on there. So just in, time-wise, Jennifer, we will reach out to you and we'll try and get a meeting set up. And if anyone, decides later on tonight or tomorrow that you would be interested, please send me an email and we'll work on this with you as well. Thank you.
Thank you all. We have, I think from today, there is the conversation around the bill that Senator Sedillo Lopez, Representative Chasey, and Representative Roybal Cabellero presented. I think there is there's room to decide if there is something that we feel we want the Law Enforcement and Public Safety Subcommittee to discuss about that, or if we feel after you review the bill, we can make a decision on that as the council. If we can leave that, here at the council. Does anybody have discussion or questions about that? So would you all like to keep it here at the Central Committee after your review, so that you have time to review it and digest it, and then we'll make the decision here at Central Committee? There's no actions that need to be forwarded to the subcommittee. Affirmative.
Yeah, but we will discuss it once we've seen it, correct, Alexander?
Yes, we've discussed it, and in fact, that is also, I mean, that is a subgroup that can also be created. If there are a few council members that would absolutely like to spend some concentrated time, I see your hand, Dr. Romero, specifically on that. That can be one of the subgroups that meets for that discussion with members from the subcommittee.
Alex, let me just say, I think that'd be a wonderful committee. I'd be interested in doing it if we do form that. Some of the feedback I do want to get is I'd actually like to talk with some of our local law enforcement entities about how they would be overseeing each other in departments. I want to get some insight to how that would work. And also, I'm really thinking about whenever there is an issue like this where there could be a deadly force. Many times it's both departments involved in that, so I'm curious how that's going to work out too. So I want to do some more thinking and maybe investigation on that. So if that does form a I wouldn't mind being on that.
Thank you, Dr. Romero. And we will also send these out in an email for folks to be able to volunteer for as well. And then I think the same is true for the racial justice impact statements as well. And so there's room for a subcommittee on that too, or a subgroup, I should say, work group. The other thing that I just wanted to acknowledge that I think Bishop Cooper brought this up in one of our earliest meetings is whether the council wants to make a recommendation that this council, an advisory council to the governor on racial justice, be instituted in state statute. I think it's important to acknowledge that we're doing this work, and not as council members, but even the staffing of this, right, with little resources. And the staff have been doing an incredible job keeping us going and keeping us moving. But we know this work is a long commitment. It is work that's going to take place over time. And so whether one of the things that comes directly from this council is instituting this council so that much like the Children's Cabinet, it exists beyond perhaps our service here and this administration. And so I don't know if we need a work group on that, or if we can just come to agreement that that is absolutely one of the recommendations we feel is important to this council in our recommendations going forward, is the perpetuity of this council. Is there any questions or discussion about that? Do we have consensus? I think it's a must. I see that, Rabbi Lennick. Do we have consensus about that? Great. So that'll be, all of this will end up being drafted into some form and then reviewed by the council to make it onto our final recommendations list. Amy, did I miss anything in the chat box that was waiting to be asked? Sometimes I'm not.
No, I think a question was just asked if the ask is for everyone here to join a subgroup, and that is absolutely the ask, right? We would like at least 2 people from the main council to sit on each of these. And so as soon as this is done, I'm going to send out the email, and I'm going to ask you to put your name in and give me the group that you absolutely want to work with and the group that is a alternate for you to work with, so that we can start putting that together right away. And we'll start forming the ability to do that. And so I'm seeing folks put stuff in the chat. That's great. Put it up in the chat if you don't think you're going to get to my email tonight or tomorrow. So, you know, definitely what we are looking for is, you know, people who want to sit on the permanent land grant fund, people who want to sit on private prisons, people who want to sit on racial equity training and hiring. I put them all in the chat, and I'll send them out in the email as well. We need you to volunteer to be on the work group, right? Volunteer.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And that is really one of our ways of kind of moving this work forward and recognizing that the subcommittees are all working really hard to get things to us. And time just keeps on going. And so how can we work together to keep moving our agenda forward and having as many robust conversations as possible so that we can make some decisions in not a lot of time before this coming legislative session. So thank you for your willingness to serve in that capacity. With that mention, the subcommittees are working on also getting recommendations up to the council. They're working really hard on that. They will again meet next Thursday, and then our next meeting will be October 21st. I just wanted to ask if there are any short and quick announcements that anyone wanted to make before we close out.
Are you looking for report outs from any of the subcommittees?
We had decided today that we were we took what came from the subcommittees to form the subgroups. And so we'll do some of that once we have the recommendations coming forward from the subcommittees. Thank you, Shawnee.
Okay, so for example, the Public Safety and Law Enforcement Subcommittee has a special meeting tomorrow, but we've talked about taking the 3 priorities that were decided by the chair and splitting our own subcommittee into groups to work on looking at specific recommendations for 1033, for training and education, and for the present situation. So just so you're aware of that.
Thank you so much, Shawnee. That's super important. Thank you for bringing that forward. Any other announcements or final thoughts, Fatima?
No, I don't have anything.
Oh, I just saw your hand. I apologize. Jennifer? No? Okay. Jacqueline?
And just a note on subcommittee meetings, Amy does send those links out for all 3 subcommittees probably at the beginning of next week. So if you guys can join that way through the agenda that she sets out for all the subcommittees, that's how we would like to move forward with those.
Thank you, Shawnee. Dr. Romero, is that your hand? Okay, and Mikhail?
Yeah.
No? Okay. I'm pausing for a moment to make sure I got everybody. If not, you can unmute. Amy will be, oh, Mr. Sanchez, did you have something? Oh, bye-bye. Okay. Amy will be working to send those work groups out so that you can sign up for those. And yes, we are directly asking for everyone to volunteer for one of the subgroups as we move these priorities forward. So thank you so much. It's good to see you. Enjoy the debate tonight. Bye-bye.